TorahCafe.com.
We're going to move to the question of cooperating witnesses. This is a fascinating, rich, complex area, and I am struck, Rabbi. I have to tell you, Rabbi Lubin, the fact that you have picked, my favorite movie of all time, Godfather. Not Once Upon a Time in America, which is also a great movie, but The Godfather. And this is a clip.
It's either that or Fiddler on the Roof.
Yes. And if you had found that clip, I would have been just as impressed, Rabbi. This is a clip that for those of us who walk around quoting The Godfather as if it is a metaphor for life, and it helps solve every complex problem, ethical or otherwise, that we face, which it actually doesn't, but those of us in the neighborhood I grew up in want to believe that. This is a famous clip. By the way, by applause, how many people think The Godfather, one of the greatest movies of all time? But I digress. That has absolutely nothing to do with Jewish ethical issues, but in the legal community, I just thought I'd bring that up. This is a clip of a gentleman by the name of Frank Pantangeli. This is a scene. Mike, you know the scene? The government has brought in Frank Pantangeli, who is one of the leading members of the organized crime family that Marlon Brando, he was just the actor. He was not involved in any way. And they have what they think is a cooperating witness who is going to name the Godfather, Don Vito Corleone. And they bring him in to this government hearing. And the senators are there. And everyone is there except, as you will see, the cooperating witness in this particular case may not have cooperated as the government has seen. And I'm not sure exactly what you're going to see, but if it needs an explanation, as you can tell, I will provide it whether you actually want it or need it. Ladies and gentlemen, from the movie The Godfather, cooperating witness, Frankie Fingers Pantangeli.
We have here finally a witness that will further testify to Michael Corleone's rule over a criminal empire that controls all of the gambling in this country, and perhaps in other countries. This witness has had no buffer between himself and Michael Corleone. He can corroborate our charges on enough counts for this committee to recommend a charge of perjury against Michael Corleone.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Pantangeli. Mr. Pantangeli, were you a member of the Corleone family? Did you serve under Capo regime, Peter Clemenza, under Vito Corleone, also known as the Godfather?
I never knew no Godfather. I got my own family, Senator.
Mr. Pantangeli, you are contradicting a sworn statement you previously made to me and signed. I ask you again, sir, here and now, under oath, were you at any time a member of a crime organization headed by Michael Corleone?
I don't know nothing about that. Oh. I was in the olive oil business with his father, but that was a long time ago, that's all.
We have a sworn affidavit. We have it. Your sworn affidavit that you murdered on the orders of Michael Corleone. Do you deny that confession? And do you realize what will happen as a result of your denial?
Look, the FBI guys, they promised me a deal. So I made up a lot of stuff about Michael Corleone, because that's what they wanted. But it was all lies. Everything. And I kept saying, Michael Corleone did this, and Michael Corleone did that. So I said, yeah, sure.
The greatest movie of all time. Well, Mike Christie, the FBI guys gave me a deal. You ever heard that before?
They always do.
What are the ethical issues, Rabbi, of the FBI guys gave me a deal, because it seems to me the FBI guys are supposed to, it seems to me, prosecute the bad guys. And sometimes when you prosecute the bad guys, you have to give deals to bad guys to get other bad guys. And I don't know, are there ethical issues associated with that in the Jewish legal community?
Of course, anybody who really considers how to prosecute crime realizes it would be very nice if all the corroborating witnesses were lily-white good people who just happened to be standing around while criminal activity was discussed. But in the real world, it doesn't always work that way. Most of the time, the people who hang around criminals are criminals. And sometimes you have to offer deals to one person to climb up the ladder. But the crucial question with collaborating witnesses goes back to the problem of truth and justice. These are hard words to figure out what's really going on, but you have to always keep track of them. You worry that the collaborating witness is telling you what you want to hear because you've told him what he has to say to get a good deal. And the Jewish tradition recognizes that's the problem. The solution here is not an obvious one, but you have to always keep track of the fact that when you're dealing with a collaborating witness, he's cooperating because otherwise it's his neck. Testimony gets discounted by the possibility that he's telling you what he needs in order to not be punished himself. The problem here, though, is not a theoretical one. The problem is a practical one, which is how do you know, in fact, when you're dealing with somebody who's thinking on the bad people, or he's just telling you what you need to know. Here the Jewish tradition says this is a judgment call, and it doesn't give you an exact response. It doesn't say you can never have collaborating witnesses unless they're lily white. But on the other hand, it causes you to realize that when you incentivize people to lie, difficult as it is for us honest people to imagine, occasionally when you incentivize people to lie, they succumb to the temptation, and their testimony thus has to be heavily discounted.
So let's bring it closer to home. Cooperating witnesses. Often people who have legal problems themselves, right, Judge?
Absolutely.
People who have serious problems in the government, I don't know, a case-by-case basis, they have some sort of discussion and they come to the conclusion, hey, this person could potentially be more valuable to us if we get this person to cooperate. And in the case of Solomon Dweck, and I don't know all the details, Mike, you may have heard of this case. Your Honor, the government has a discussion with Mr. Dweck. As I understand it, Mr. Dweck says, I can be helpful. I would like to cooperate. And he's very cooperative. Now, where are the ethical issues from a legal perspective for the lawyers in the room with respect to the government engaging Mr. Dweck in that dialogue and ultimately the activities that took place for Mr. Dweck to go out there into the community with money given by the government to do what he did? Where are the ethical issues, or is that just cooperation?
I'll tell you, I don't want to duck any questions, Steve. All right, but first, it's a case to a certain degree which is still pending before my court. So if you do it as a more hypothetical sense, I could be freer in responding.
Judge, say the government had a witness. Say the government has a witness. Say the government has someone, and they've got this person, and the government says, hey, the government says, we've got you. And it's clear that the lawyer representing this person says, hey, listen, they've got you. They've got you. Look, they've got it right here, and you're going to do whatever kind of time. And the lawyer advises the client, listen, if it were me, I'd be helpful. I'd cooperate. And in the course of the discussion, the cooperation is defined as, if you can help us identify some folks out there who are the, quote, bad guys, other bad guys, we would appreciate it, and it could be helpful to you down the road in terms of the sentencing process. My question is this, in terms of the ethical issues, does it matter whether the government says, here's what we'd like you to do, or the person in trouble says, I've got an idea? Does it matter who says what? And who starts the ball rolling?
I think, to a certain degree, I'm viewing this as a former prosecutor rather than as a judge. And in that pure sense, I think the answer is no. I think the core, from a prosecutor's point of view, is that the information which you get, the evidence which you get, is credible and reliable, and there are various ways that experienced prosecutors can at least make a solid effort to see that it is, and that they are not being sold a bill of goods for somebody to buy their freedom. And that, in fact, what you are pursuing, all right, whatever it may be, is something which, in fact, in an overall ethical, moral scheme, is worth pursuing. You don't, in the jargon of the trade, all right, flip a whale to get a minnow.
Right.
You don't flip the chief of police to get the line police officers.
Right.
If you are a prosecutor, that doesn't make any logical, moral, or ethical sense. If, on the other hand, the situation is reversed, then your key question is somebody feeding you information simply to get themselves off the hook? Or can you, in fact, use various devices to see whether or not the information and the evidence you get, in the first instance, satisfies you that it, in fact, is credible, reliable, and is something which you would feel comfortable taking before a jury? And that's purely as a former prosecutor, and it's been many, many years since I've done that.
Judge, I appreciate that and appreciate your candor. But what's interesting about the Frank Pantangeli clip from The Godfather is that it seems to me, Rabbi, respectfully, is that that is pretty black and white, meaning the government had Frank Pantangeli. And he said, I'll give you what you want. I'll give you The Godfather. And ultimately, so everyone understands, if you didn't see the movie now, it doesn't matter. They brought in his brother from Sicily. And when Frank Pantangeli saw his brother, he looked at his brother, he looked at the government prosecutors, and there was no choice at all. And so, he wasn't going to flip, he wasn't going to cooperate, and ultimately he did what a quote-unquote honorable man would do, and if you look at the rest. But my point is, that is not the gray area, that is not the ethical area. The ethical dilemma, it seems to me, Mike, is the one where the government is saying, hey, listen, you are in trouble. And potentially the witness, cooperating witness, is saying, I can go out there and get someone to do something that they might otherwise not do. Mike, is that not the ethical dilemma, or am I making too much of this?
No, you're absolutely right. When we deal with cooperators, we have to remember a couple of things. Cooperators come in different types of silos. You have, and full disclosure, anybody who does criminal defense work has and will represent cooperators in the future, and I have and will in the future. But cooperators come in all types of silos. You have some cooperators who were never in trouble before, but for the incident before them and before the court, who will never be in trouble again. They provide information and receive the benefit. Then you go down the line and you get to the Pantangeli types, who are absolutely sociopaths. I mean, if you look at DSM-4 and you look at the factors that determine whether a person should be diagnosed as a sociopath, often you get cooperating witnesses who fit that very diagnosis. And they are the ones that are particularly dangerous because they are so manipulative, so clever, so full of guile, that they could turn the system on its head.
How so?
Well, for example, the rabbi made a great summation in terms of why cooperators are useful and will be used and should be used. And we as a society should have no problem with the government using cooperators where we know there is evidence of ongoing criminal activity. We know if someone's involved in organized crime like Pantangeli, crime is going on, fair game, send somebody in there, uncover it. We know there's a drug operation, there's drug dealing going on. We know criminal activity is afoot, go in there and solve it. We know there's gang activity, cooperate. But what about the situation, and it's been happening, where you have not criminal activity ongoing, you have people who are not otherwise engaging in criminal activity, and you send a clever manipulator out there to tempt someone to commit a crime who is not otherwise committing a crime. And but for the judge, myself, the rabbi, and Steve, and a few here, I know everybody at one point in life could have their judgment tempted by temptation. And you saw, and I'm only going to discuss Solomon Dweck to the extent it's a matter of public record, and it's just my opinion. You saw situations where public officials who were not otherwise engaging in criminal activity, they woke up at 9 o'clock in the morning, were doing whatever they're going to do, had no intention to go out and commit a crime, sell drugs, engage in organized crime activity, involve in a crime, and all of a sudden you send somebody like Mr. Dweck or Pantangeli there to tempt them. At what point does their temptation succumb to judgment, where it's trumped? And those are the types of situations that concern me. It's not entrapment. It's certainly not entrapment.
It's an ethical issue?
It's a situation as a society. What do we want? Do we want to live like that, where we can send people out to tempt otherwise innocent people who are not engaging in criminal activity for the purpose of them ensnaring them? I mean, it seems like our country, and it's just, I'm not trying to be too provocative, and this is obvious an exaggeration. So I say this with the understanding it's on steroids. It's almost as if we're becoming a nation of informers, and we, as a public policy, encourage it. The SEC has whistleblower, and if you're involved, you could get 30% of a reward. The IRS, same thing. You could turn somebody in, get 30%, even if you're involved in the wrongdoing. Dodd-Frank does the same thing. I mean, it's effective, but at what point do we come closer to a Soviet style of law enforcement and lose what we say is a balance? But it's appropriate to be done, it's legal.
I want the judge and rabbi to jump in. Judge, rabbi, jump in, go.
Okay, I, with the greatest respect for my friend Michael, would disagree with him very strongly. And the reason is this. The kind of situation which he is describing, called integrity testing or whatever, means that somebody comes up to me wearing a tape recorder and says, Judge Chesler, will you take $50,000 to fix this case? It may be slightly less overt, but that's the gist of it. And he's wearing a tape recorder. As a public official, if I agree to take that $50,000, I've got nobody to blame but myself. I've done it to myself, and I deserve whatever happens to me. Even if this was not something which I would have gone out for. Every person in this room has a right to expect that I, as a public servant, in fact, am not going to take bribes, whether or not it's a setup or not. And the alternative is, this gentleman on the screen we had a few moments ago, all right, putting him on the stand, and he's not engaged in tape-recorded conversations. So a jury is going to be asked whether or not they believe him and some corroborating evidence or corroborating testimony. And between somebody whose word corroborated with some additional evidence is going to result in a criminal conviction, as opposed to my own words convicting myself and telling the public that I have engaged in conduct which is totally reprehensible. For society, I'll take the latter.
Fair game, Judge? It's fair game. It is fair game, Judge?
It's fair game.
Not an ethical issue.
I don't see it as an ethical issue at all.
Not concerned about it. You say bring it on. Let us be judged by our actions.
I say that if my own words on a tape recording say that I am willing to be corrupted, yes.
Mike, before you respond, Rabbi, do you want us to respond to this before I let Mike? Or is it a different
I think
topic?
that to the extent that we want to do integrity testing of public officials, it's a wonderful idea, but we should send honorable people in. The problem we have in the Dweck matter is we incentivize the person who's doing the testing to get you to fail.
Explain that.
When I send in somebody who we've got the goods on, and I say to him, the only way you'll not be punished for your crime is if you can bring a big fish down with you, he has every incentive to not only bring a big fish down, but if need be, to manipulate the data to make it look like the big fish is corrupt when he isn't. Public integrity testing is a very good thing, and the FBI should run ab-scam type events, as they did in New Jersey 20 years ago, regularly to see who takes bribes. But it's much harder when I turn to a criminal I've got the goods on, and I say, in order for you to get off, you need to bring me a whale. Sometimes he sets up a construct in which the whale is really innocent, but just appears to be guilty.
Real quick, before Mike jumps in, are you saying, Rabbi, that you believe that, quote-unquote, cooperating witnesses, the use of cooperating witnesses, has significantly changed over the past decade plus?
I think the number of times where the government has taken a dirty witness and made him into a cooperating witness has dramatically increased in the past 20 years. As Mike has told us, the government has incentivized people who are dirty to cooperate. And that's much more complex and much more likely to produce a wrong result than a situation where the government incentivizes innocent people to integrity test government officials. I agree with the judge that integrity testing of government officials is a good thing, and it's something that law enforcement should continuously do. But it's important to do so in a way that actually reinforces notions of justice and doesn't encourage a corruption of the process.
And some ethical issues there, right, Rabbi?
And some ethical issues.
Michael.
And the reason it's practically important, I remember reading 5-6 years ago, I forget, in 2000, the number of federal defendants who cooperate, are cooperators, is like 25%. So it's not something that's just isolated. It's almost becomes a core of our law enforcement system. And with Judge Chesler, I agree with Judge Chesler in that construct, where someone comes up to you and the immediate conversation is, I'll offer you $50,000 for a bribe, for influencing the judicial outcome. That's clear. But when you deal with a sociopath, they are not that blunt. They engage in a grooming process. It's not the first conversation. It's not the second conversation. And before you know, it's almost a drive-by conversation. You don't even know what happened. And say, oops. And we have to say, at what point do we as a society say, when does an individual, because they are so damaged in terms of their value system, forfeits their credibility, where they cannot be used as a cooperator? And I don't know if we reached the length, because when you talk about some of the most famous cooperators, Sammy the Bull, he killed 19 people. And that was just one part of his resume.
So we should raise the bar for cooperating witnesses, Mike?
He basically did 5 months a body.
Judge?
I don't recall Sammy the Bull wearing a wire and doing integrity testing. In fact, his cases were based upon his credibility, Mike. And the cases where look, no criminal justice system functions effectively and intelligently and ethically if the prosecutors and the investigators are not ethical and skilled. Right? If prosecutors don't have enough sense to weed out cases which in fact are the drive-bys, then what happens, among other things, is acquittals. And my recollection is that Mr. Dweck got some acquittals. So part of it is, in fact, that none of these prosecutions depend solely on, we are trusting the integrity of our cooperator. If you're a prosecutor and you trust the integrity of your cooperator implicitly, you better have a reality check.
Yes, by the way, I just remembered before we went up here that you and Mike said you wouldn't be disagreeing on much, but go ahead, Rabbi.
20 years ago, when I was much skinnier and a law clerk to Judge Garda, here in Newark, Judge Garth turned to me one summer day and said, "Michael, do you want to go play tennis?" And the answer is I didn't. But that wasn't the correct answer for a clerk to give. So I said, "Sure, Your Honor, I'll go play tennis." I confess years, neither in yeshiva nor law school, made me a tennis player. But Judge Garth, on the other hand, who's now well in his 90s, was then well in his 70s. And I figured, how hard could it be to beat a 70-year-old man in tennis? And as we're going to the tennis field, Judge Garth turns to me and says, "No matter what happens, you have to play your hardest." And I said, "Judge, why would you think I wouldn't play my hardest?" And he said, "Well, I've discovered no matter how poorly I play tennis, I beat all the lawyers in Newark." Public integrity isn't always about a $50,000 bribe. It's sometimes a much more subtle process. I played my hardest. The judge beat me anyway. There was a lesson there as well. But it's important to understand that integrity testing of public officials isn't always about the subtle, the overt bribe. Sometimes it's about much more subtle things. It's good that we should test the integrity of our governmental officials. The Jewish tradition reminds us to be alert all the time for even subtle notions of bribery. But still, there's always a fear that when you incentivize people to catch a whale, they lie. They pretend to catch a whale. They bring down a very good person on the most trivial and mundane things. And that's a very bad system fraught with justice problems. Again, a word that's worth mentioning over and over again.
And just to my experience, I don't think I've ever seen a cooperating witness on the stand who did not lie about something. Maybe not be material, but did not lie about something. And just again, to bring it home, we have the Stevens case, where we had a prosecution at the highest levels of government.
Senator
Stevens, regulated by the top officials in the Justice Department, being prosecuted by the Office of Public Integrity. And two of the assistant United States attorneys, if you read the Schulke report, which Judge Sullivan required, Mr. Schulke found that two of the assistant United States attorneys assigned to the case willfully engaged in misconduct, Brady violations, and one sat there while a witness testified falsely and did not correct that conduct. All I'm saying is that in the real world, you're dealing with people whose credibility is almost, it's a word that doesn't go together with cooperators. I mean, when you look at the Rule 603, when you look at the wording of 603, it basically says, it used to say, you have to give an oath in such a form as to awaken the conscience of the witness. That presumes the witness has a conscience. And I'm not being flip, but when you're dealing with a sociopath, by definition, they don't have a conscience. So that barrier between false and truthful testimony, which the oath, I say something, as I often say, might as well be a bologna sandwich. It has no meaning to the witness like that.